Bloom is a professor of economics at Stanford University. He has studied remote work and its economic impacts for around 20 years. Since COVID transformed our ways of working, his work and insight have been in very high demand. He was certainly ahead of the curve, and thank goodness he was. His research and insights have helped us shape how we approach remote and hybrid work all over the world. From a personal perspective, Nick's work has been incredibly influential for me as a workforce strategy and flexible work specialist. I reference him a lot in my book and in my work. My clients and my friends and family all know about him because of how often I drop his name into our conversations. I've been creating this Big Ideas, Big Dreams series of articles, spotlighting economists who have a big idea that's inspired something important for me and my dream, which is all about leading for a better future of work. The point of this series is to share some important economic ideas and the hope that others will also be inspired by them. I wanted to have this grand finale, Nick, to this series by interviewing you. So I'm absolutely delighted to be talking to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So welcome, Nick, and thanks so much for taking the time. Let's get started with, what is your big dream for the world, Nick?
Oh, gosh. I mean, I'll come back to work from home, but, end of cancer, world peace. But if I narrow it into something, I guess, on the work from home, I wanted to see this more generally spread out. I get, my view is kind of for North America, Australia, New Zealand, UK, in our global data, they already have reasonably high levels. The places I see is, problematically low are a lot of Asia, actually, East Asia, much of Southern Europe. If I focus on East Asia, you look at countries like Japan, South Korea, they have a very much full-time in the office model, whereas in fact, these are places that will benefit actually tremendously from work from home. In the sense they have long punishing commutes, so you can get rid of that. They're very dense cities, so it allows people to move further out. They also have real population crisis with extremely low birth rates. It's much easier to bring up kids if, you have individuals, single parents or dual parents that either one or both can work from home. So yeah. I would love to see the roughly 50% of populations in developed countries that can work from home be allowed to do that, maybe on average, 1, 2, 3 days a week in future.
Yeah. And when you think about that possibility, so say that's job done, right? And we've got 50% of the developed world's workforce working from home at least some of the time. What do you see is the benefit of that more broadly to workplaces and society?
So I think work from home is a real win-win-win. There's probably a lot of people listening that are managers. So, the first people I'd pitch to are managers and firms because they're ultimately the decision makers. The pitch really to them is typically it can be profitable, really quite profitable. So why don't I just use an example of Stanford University? So we have around 20,000 employees across, we have a university and 2 hospital systems. About 10,000 have to come in every day. So imagine you're doing food service, security, cleaning, you're, a nurse or something. You really pretty much have to be there every day, day in, day out. So that's something we can't change. If you look at the other 10,000, about 8,000 of them, faculty and staff, can be on a hybrid schedule. So if you take me, classroom teaching is much better in person. So I do that always in person. A lot of meeting students, you maybe want to meet them the first time in person, but there's a lot of research, data work, reading, writing reports, some committee work can be done remotely. And then for us, we have about 2,000 employees that are fully remote. Why fully remote? Well, it turns out for the university, it's a lot cheaper. So we don't have to A, pay for offices, and B, we're based in San Francisco. It's a really expensive labor market. If we hire folks, say, I don't know, Mississippi or, Alabama or Alaska, you can get an equally or better skilled person for maybe 10 or 20% less. Yes. So the real appeal is, for hybrid, for people like me, it reduces turnover rates. So, our productivity is as effective as ever, but it's, less expensive for the university in terms of industry hiring and recruiting. And for fully remote workers, you can actually reduce office costs and reduce hiring. So one win is for firms. A second win is for employees. People like me and you, we really like it. People have different preferences, but the average person wants to work from home typically 2-3 days a week. And then finally, for society, there's a number of big gains, but the most obvious are less pollution from commuting.
Yeah.
And it allows parents to spend more time with kids, which certainly post-pandemic is a big issue.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think trying to find ways for working parents to do that juggle in a way that means they can still pursue their career while being present as part of their family is so critical, right? So yeah, okay, thank you.
I was about to say, Gillian, as an economist, were like typically called the dismal science. And I have to say, rare, if really never in my career have I come across a change that's so unanimously good. So, think of, I don't know, global trade or competition or, various other policies or minimum wages. There's a whole bunch of losers and winners, and people are changing taxes, argue all the time. And you're really trading off. One group wins, one group loses. In the case of work from home, pretty much everyone wins. There are a few losers. The most obvious are folks that own big office buildings in city centers or out in the suburbs. But as a group, I don't, they're generally pretty wealthy. They've, made good money over the last 20 years. Many of them are big investment organizations that hold stocks, bonds, other stuff. So they're up on that. So, there are a few office owners, but they're pretty few and far between. I'd say, 95% of society now wins from this.
Yeah, exactly. It's so exciting, isn't it? I love putting it in that framing, that's so rare to have a big shift in society that has just that positive sum game rather than something else. Okay, so when you think about this big idea about working from home and the positive impact that can have, how has your idea around that shifted over the last 20 years?
Well, interesting. I have been working on it for 20 years. When I first started, that was 2004. So back then, remote work was A, very rare. B, if you did it, you tended to be fully remote. There wasn't, there were a bunch of people that would take the odd day off every other month. I mean, I'm one of four kids. Both my parents worked, and my parents definitely would sporadically work from home when I was growing up for childcare reasons. But it wasn't regular. It wasn't great. It was carrying pieces of paper, or at some point, personal computers came out. But, that was after I was a kid. So in 2004, there were personal computers. The internet was around, but there was no cloud. There was no video calls. So when I used to work from home, which I do on occasion, I'd spend the day at home. It would be freeconferencecall.com, emailing files. It was okay. It was workable, but I wouldn't say it was great. You can't share a screen, for example. So if you're trying to, develop a presentation or look at data or charts, there's no, you have to say, oh, look, I've got a really good figure in Excel. Why don't I need email it over to say, it was really cumbersome. And it was growing. So again, work from home was actually growing and has been doubling roughly every 15 years. We have data going back to the 60s. So it's definitely growing. It was just a very low base. So it was, doubling from 2% to 4%, and then from 4%, to 8%, etc. But it reached about 6% of people on the eve of the pandemic. So 2019, about 6% of days. That's the best measure. How many days will work from home? So before the pandemic, it was there. It was pretty rare. It was, you talk to people, they wouldn't be very interested. Their eyes might start to glaze over. It's like, can we talk about something more exciting? Like my next door neighbor on Stanford campus, I was one of the founders of the driverless car. That was an exciting topic. Working from home in 2018 was not an exciting topic. And then suddenly the pandemic just totally changed everything in a couple of ways. One is obviously during the lockdown, it became a critical non-medical way to, try and reduce the impact of the pandemic and probably save many, many, many millions of lives because people were at home and they weren't as in contact with each other. Long run, post-pandemic, it also turned out just to work amazingly well. I mean, way beyond mine or anyone else's expectations. I was kind of like an advocate for it in advance. And even I was astounded how well it worked. I thought, it might just about get us through, but it's going to be pretty miserable and productivity is going to collapse and the economy is going to do terribly. And look, the economy didn't do great, but we recovered. And now 2024, we have 5 times the level of work from home, and actually performance is pretty good. So by now, post-pandemic, it's really obvious that sure, fully remote typically doesn't work for most people. It definitely works for some. So about 10% of people are fully remote in kind of Europe and the US, Australia, New Zealand. But there's another 30% of us that are hybrid, which would include me. I go I'm actually in the office right now. As I mentioned, I came in at lunchtime. I'd in about 50% of time. Hybrid is great. And that is a new reality. And that's totally changed. And it's very clearly here to stay.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I love what you said about how it kind of surprised you. I remember, so 5 years ago, I decided to become a flexible work specialist. And that's again when it was not very fashionable. That's good.
Yeah, your timing was perfect.
Yeah. And I think, one of the things that helped me see that it was really important was I was doing my busy day job as an HR leader, but trying to get to the point where we could really make the most of flexibility. I just could never quite get to the point of redesigning it to make it really, really powerful. So that's what I decided to do 5 years ago. But I'm thinking, that was 5 years ago. You were thinking about this for the last 20 years. And even you were surprised by just how well things have gone since the pandemic. What do you put that, what are the ingredients that are present that perhaps we weren't aware of or that we now are, that you think have kind of created this positive sum game, whereas perhaps before you were thinking, oh, productivity is going to collapse and everything. What would you put that surprise down to?
There's a few things. One is the timing was maybe quite lucky in the sense that we had the internet, we had the personal computer, but there are a couple of things that are critical, a couple of pieces of software in my mind that are really critical. One is obviously video calls, which Zoom came out in 2012, 2011. It wasn't great early on, but by the time of the pandemic, Zoom was really pretty good. Teams wasn't as good. WebEx existed, but there were enough software out there to carry that through. The other one that's less obvious, but is cloud and file sharing. So things like Dropbox. I was already using Dropbox from about 2013. It was kind of pretty revolutionary as an academic, working with co-authors around the world, and you have a project folder, and it's really great. You can upload stuff, and they can say, I've worked on the paper, or I've improved the presentation. You go and download it. That was a huge thing as well, because it meant you didn't physically need to be in the office. My first job was in 1996, and there was an office file system and servers, and if you were not in the office, you couldn't connect to it. So those two have been hugely important. The other thing I think is there's just an equilibrium shift. So what's interesting, when I talk to a lot of people in professional service firms that have clients, customers. I used to work in McKinsey. So take McKinsey as an example. McKinsey couldn't really work from home in 2019 because none of the clients would. They'd get into the office. What are you doing? We're paying you however many $1,000 a day to fix our company. So you better be here at 8 a.m. and don't leave before 8 p.m. But now, of course, the clients are working from home 3 days a week. And so they're very happy for the consultants to be at home. And so the whole ecosystem, and you can have doctor's appointments online, and you can do everything so much more online. So everything is. And if you tell a parent, if your kid's friends at school, I work from home, they don't look at you and stand back, worry they'll catch something off you, which might have happened in 2018. It's now become totally normal. So I think there's just been what, as an economist, you call an equilibrium shift. It's a bit like, there's a good example. These shifts are hard to do, but driving on the left or the right side of the road, neither's better or worse. And in fact, Sweden changed sides apparently in the 60s, and there were loads of accidents for about a week. Then it settled down. But it's not like left or right is better. In this case, I think working from home equilibrium is better. It was hard on the shift, but now we shifted, we've stuck.
Yeah, exactly. And like you say, enabled by that technology has made such a difference. I remember one of the things that shone a light on it for me was we had a big earthquake here in New Zealand in 2016, and all of a sudden lots of offices were out of commission for obvious reasons, and some organizations were ready to go because they had the right technology. People had laptops at home. Other organizations, that didn't exist. So I think you're right that it can really make such a difference, kind of, if you've got that enabling technology in place. Plus,
Gillian, the other positive spin I put on technology actually is another kind of econ 101, which is the market size for selling work from home hardware, software products has just increased 5x. So roughly, there are 5 times as many days work from home now in 2024 than there were in 2019, which means if you're Microsoft, Google, any of the startups I see out in Silicon Valley, etc., you're suddenly thinking, wow, this is a huge market. And actually, I spoke to Nadella, Satya Nadella, a couple of years ago during the pandemic, and he was like, "We're definitely swiveling R&D teams to think about products serving that market." I mean, we were introduced by Cadence. So Cadence does desk booking software, and they're a classic example that pre-pandemic, Dan Bladen, the CEO, was working in Chargify, was doing that kind of wireless charging. Suddenly the pandemic comes along and everyone needs to have, with hybrid, it's more complicated with desk booking. And there's many, many examples like this. I was up in San Francisco the other day, where there's a company that has this thing called a portal. They have it's about 8 foot by 8 foot. And rather than looking at something through Zoom, you're looking at a full body size screen. And it's kind of really cool that, the guy founding it was saying he got a wave of VC funding suddenly because of the pandemic. So I also think it's kind of sowed its own seeds of its own success. So when I look at 2030, I think the level of working from home will be higher than it is now because the technology will be so much better.
Yeah, I saw that actually. I was looking at your most recent digest from June, your working from home research, and seeing that, we're seeing this tiny, well, it's sort of plateaued really, hasn't it, in terms of working from home, maybe some slight decreasing, but very, very marginal. But like you said in the report, the technology is going to just drive more possibility and get rid of some of that, whether it's real or perceived, but some of the downside of working from home and the hybrid way of working. Oh, so interesting. Okay. So what was it 20 years ago that got you into this idea?
It was a combination of one as a kid of, I have three siblings. Both my parents work full time. They both work for the British government, actually, in the NHS and the civil service. So they're, kind of nice middle class jobs, but not like super high end type stuff. I saw it. I just remember when there was any childcare thing, or, as you mentioned, there was like a snow or something like that, we'd have to stay home. One of my mum or dad would have to work from home. And then also I spent a bit of time at McKinsey in the early 2000s, and I got involved in some research on the importance of management. And there's lots of kind of research on what is good or bad management, but it was much less clear on the importance of what I would call being nice to people practices, which is maternity leave, paternity leave, job sharing, working from home. In fact, my wife had been on 2 maternity leaves, then changed employer, and then it was on her third, and the second employer was massively more generous. And I remember thinking, is that good or bad? It's not obvious. And, for society, you think it's good. And obviously, the individual, it was great because she had really generous maternity leave. But I was kind of trying to think as a researcher, what is the correct level of maternity leave? And you realize there's just, other things like work from home. I realized there's so little research. So I just started collecting data. I didn't, the first step is just, what is it? So we ran a survey of 750 companies, and we're asking questions, including, do you allow job sharing? Do you allow part-time? Do you allow employees to work from home? And then started to correlate that with performance growth rates. Interestingly found that better managed, more successful companies tended to offer more work from home, more job sharing. It doesn't tell you it's causal. So one of the important things as an economist is it might be there's something that's making them profitable and make them treat their employees well, but at least they move together. So it makes it harder to argue they're very bad for performance, at least.
Yeah. Oh, that's so fascinating. I love your curiosity and your ability to stay objective, even when it's your own family that's kind of experiencing some of these good kind of practices. You're like, okay, but is this actually the right thing? I love that kind of critical view that you can bring. It's so good. So good.
My kids definitely claim they're so fed up with hearing the words work from home. Because I live in California, and we had because of the earthquake risk here, all the I grew up in London. So in London, all the houses are brick, and because the cold, and it's, I guess, increasingly now heat in the summer, actually. But in California, earthquake's a big thing. And so they have these wood frame houses, but the soundproofing is terrible. And so they can hear, work from home floating through the walls, and I'm having a discussion. So they're like, oh my God, never again, please.
Yeah. It's like osmosis. They're absorbing.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh dear. Okay. So zooming out a bit from working from home and into kind of other ways of working or other managerial kind of ways of doing things, is there any kind of either different forms of flexibility or different types of people management that you think the world needs to be turning its attention to?
I'm not exactly your answer. I'll give you 3 kind of interesting themes that I'm seeing. the first is just two kind of tips on work from home, and then which the second is more broad, and the third are more general HR tips. So the first two is what I see now is the importance of coordination. So maybe it seems obvious, but everyone's now on the hybrid train. The question is, how do you manage it? And the big thing is to coordinate. There's really not much point. When you survey people and ask them, why do you want to come in the office? Everyone basically says to see their colleagues. Nobody wants to come in to kind of for the free bagel or to, for the ping pong table. So what you need is that you're better off having everyone coming in on the same 2 days than everyone coming in on 3 days, but on non-overlapping, because you come in, you have these irritating Zoom calls where 4 people in the room and 4 at home. So coordination's critical. A second bigger message that's always been there, but it's just the volume has been turned up, is the importance of performance reviews. So to explain this, pre-pandemic, you could do management by walking around. So Gillian, if you're my boss, you could be in the office. Am I at my computer typing away? When you walk past, is it like Excel, Word, I don't know, Python, or is it like Champions League or the wrestling or whatever it is? You basically can walk around and roughly watch your employees. You can measure their inputs. And I'm not claiming it's great management. It's like 5 out of 10. It's okay. But you can kind of live. It's not great. It's not terrible, but it's kind of, it's survivable. Suddenly, when someone's at home, you have no idea what I'm doing. Now, of course, you can use surveillance software, but it's horrible and people really dislike that. So then you're left, but like, how do I manage Nick? Like, how do I make sure he's doing anything? The short answer is it's not very easy. And so what you really need to switch to is performance or output evaluation or outcomes. So instead you'd say, Nick, look, what I'm going to do is evaluate you reasonably regularly and give you formal performance reviews every 6 months on your objectives. For me, that might be teaching, undergrads, graduates, MBAs, research, publications, blogs, media coverage, university. There's a number of metrics I could have. Yeah. You'd review these. The big upside for you is you don't have to breathe down my neck and be checking how fast I respond to Slack or emails or, whether I'm on, just like basically monitoring me. And the better thing for me is I can say, hey, I know Gillian wants me to do this stuff. I'm going to go play around the golf or go pick my kids up or go to the dentist or go shopping or sleep in, whatever. And I'll make up for it in the evening. So that was always good HR to have performance evaluations, but suddenly it's become a lot more important because you can't do the fallback, the sticking plaster of input monitoring.
Yeah, exactly. I love that, and I certainly when I'm training people, I talk about that, and I talk about how you talk about that as well, like the importance of outcome and outputs rather than measuring and looking at performance from an input point of view. When you play that through our whole employment cycle, what's your take on the disruption and perhaps disintegration that our employment contracts or agreements are essentially a time for money exchange? If we think about people that work part-time, they get a reduction in what they get paid because of the hours that they're willing to work, for example. Do you think that there's any disruption likely to come if we really go hard out on performance for outputs and outcomes? Do you think that means that our employment agreements will eventually shift too?
It's a great question, actually. I'd never thought about that. I'm normally used to dealing with the world of people that are on salaries. So if you take, that are paid X per year, and then they're typically paid monthly or, twice a month, and they have take me, I think I have a nominal number of hours I work for Stanford. The fact I don't even know what it is, I think it might be 40, but I'm not even sure. I mean, in practice, I'm well aware that I'm expected to work more. And if you really stuck to, or when I was at McKinsey, in fact, the fascinating thing, when I joined McKinsey in 2001, Britain was in the European Union, and I had 2 contracts I had to sign. The first was in the same envelope. The first was my contract for McKinsey. The second was the opt-out of the European Working Time Directive, which limited you to 45 hours a week. And the message was, you got to be dreaming if you think you're going to work for 45 hours a week. In fact, when we arrived, they told us 60 was the aspiration, 80 was the reality. And it might, which it did. I mean, that was about right. I worked on average 80 hours a week. But so for people that are on salaries, they're normally evaluated on performance. You are correct. If someone's paid hourly, it's a little tricky. And it may be the way you adjust it, depends on what they're doing, is you somewhat lower the hourly rate and include a performance bonus. So a type of profession that actually works extremely well on fully remote is call centers. So I've done some randomized control trials in call centers. The way you might do it is lower the hourly rate and have some quite generous bonuses based on reasonable performance. And call centers are very easy to evaluate because you only really need two things. You need the volume of calls, or at least time on. And then secondly, they typically silently monitor about 1%, 0.5% of calls and give you a quality grade. So you may say, look, if you reach satisfactory performance, you get an extra 50%. If you meet these things, you get another 25%. Yeah. So they may end up getting paid more. There's no reason why, people are outperforming what they're in person. So we ran another randomized control trial on call centers where we randomized people in the office 5 days a week or in the office 1 day a week and working from home for 4. And it turned out the second group were 13% more efficient, which is massively more efficient. When you interviewed them, they say, well, in the office, often late because of my motorcycle breaks down or the bus is late. Lunches are longer. To go to the bathroom takes longer. It's a long way away. I'm disrupted. There was someone complaining about the person at the table next to them. Desk would cut their toenails under the desk. All kinds of stories. Yeah, it was like, or there's a cake in the breakout room. So they also say it's quieter at home. Like if you've ever had a call center and it seems like the person isn't listening to you, they may not because it's just so noisy.
Yeah.
So it's a good question. I think generally for hourly pay, it may mean more of a shift to performance pay. Your question invokes, there was an article very recent in the media about Wells Fargo firing a bunch of mouse jigglers. I don't know if you saw that. So Wells Fargo Bank said they discovered about a dozen employees have been using mouse jigglers and fired them on the spot. So what mouse jigglers are, in case you don't know, Wells Fargo are clearly using software that is checking whether you're on the laptop. And in order to check it, it's seeing how often you're moving your mouse as apparently the keyboard. And to get around that, people buy on Amazon these things called mouse jigglers that automatically move it around. Now, one thing is, my biggest takeaway from it is I was shocked that Wells Fargo were using this software in the first place. It seems a terrible way to manage people. Like, don't they have a performance metric? I mean, that is trying to measure hours. So whatever these people are doing, surely they have a better way. Can't you just say, just get your job done and here are 8 targets. Once you achieve them, you're off, rather than we need you to be sat at your computer for 8 hours. It's like,
it's management by presenteeism, isn't it? And I think that's what I've ever since I was doing kind of remote work training and things during the pandemic, and ever since there's been people who will bravely admit that they've been, my Teams, I don't look like I'm green on Teams, so I need to do something because I've been reading something that wasn't, that was a tangible book or I printed something out, and so I've not been tapping away at my computer, so I need to make sure it stays green. It's like, what are we trying to do here? The unintended consequences, I think, of that managing by presenteeism remotely. So but I'm really fascinated with this idea about how our employment legislation might need to upgrade to fit with where we're taking work and what we pay people for. If we're not going to pay them for hours worked, then perhaps we need to kind of reward people differently. I love your idea that we might move to performance pay. I
mean, there are ups and downsides. There's some downsides. I mean, on average, people get paid more of performance pay because they tend to work harder and therefore there's some sharing. So look, if you're a firm and your employees are 20% more productive, you don't pay them typically 20% more, but you certainly pay them somewhat more because you're a lot more profitable. But there is some variation. So, there's a whole debate in economics about average versus spread. And generally we want people to earn more, but we want them to, have less variation amongst at least. In this case, it's probably based on performance. You feel like if you work hard and you get paid more and that generates inequality, it's less clear whether that's bad or not. But, it will end up, I think, with some more inequality.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm noticing that we've seen a bit of a drop off in part-time as well, where, people are sort of thinking, well, why am I going to opt for part-time employment when I can now kind of get my full-time work done? Everyone else is working more flexibly. I can probably squeeze in those extra hours and get paid the full-time equivalent like everybody else, rather than take the pay cut and still produce the same amount.
Totally. I can see that. Like if everyone's working at home Monday, Friday, and I wanted to have Monday, Friday off to look after my kids, I can just put in, a demon long Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, do a little
Yeah.
bit on Monday, Friday, and I basically,
Yeah.
I'm working more, but I'm getting paid a lot more, and it's a good deal.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. So we'll see.
Gillian, the other thing I was going to point out, just the biggest picture thing, is I have some other research that I'll give you the backdrop to this. I was talking to a lot of kind of boards and C-suite, some CEOs, some like, CFO types. And something that became clear over the last 2-3 years is the rise of HR, in the sense that HR, is most concretely in office real estate decisions. So if you go back to 2019, most real estate decisions were things around cost per square foot, leasing, office lengths, kind of dry, financy type things taken by the CFO or someone sitting below him or her. In 2022, 23, increasingly, it's an HR type thing over how many days a week and which teams are coming in, and therefore how much office space do we need and whether we want flex, et cetera, or event space. And it made me realize that, thinking about DEI, Me Too, the pandemic lockdown, all of these things, there's a lot more work that's been and responsibility being pushed on HR. So I decided to look at this a bit more systematically. So in the US, it turns out every publicly listed company has to file once a year something called the DEF 14A statement, which lists the 5 most important executives in the company. Now, always, one of them is always the CEO, almost always one of them is the CFO. The question is, who are the other 3? So I looked at the S&P 1500, so the 1,500 largest firms. We went back to 1992, the first year we have it. Back then, less than 0.5% were HR. So chief person officer, chief human resource officer, basically were never in the top 5, almost never. If you look over year by year, that share has been rising and rising and rising. And in fact, it's been rising at an accelerating rate. It's like some kind of takeoff lift.
Wow.
And 13% in 2022, and it's probably 14-15% now. So another trend I'm seeing is just the rapidly increasing importance of HR in companies.
Yeah.
Just events, and you could flip it around another way as an economist. It just shows the increasing importance of people / human capital in companies, that HR is increasingly becoming one of the top 5 roles. So that's another big trend I see.
Yeah, I love that. And I think I was actually running a workforce strategy workshop with an executive team this week. And one of the things we were talking about is the importance of connecting in with property and finance, your IT, and what's happening with AI, because you can't talk about AI without talking about humans. Like, who's going to do what? Is it going to be the machines or the people? And property, increasingly, particularly now we're much more hybrid, we can't have a property conversation without people, because actually, how are we going to be working? Where are we going to be working? What does the environment need to operate and offer when we are here physically? And again, it's all about the HR kind of function, and what does good work look like. So I think that's really fascinating. It'll be interesting to see if that continues to accelerate, that trend that you
we're going to get another year's worth of data. Let's see. I'm looking forward to it.
Great. I look forward to that. I'm interested, actually, as you share your insights, and you've obviously been doing a lot of that over the last 4 years. What kind of responses do you get that on both sides of the ledger? So what are the responses you get from your audience that really heartens you? And what are the responses that you find frustrating, or that, a bit more disheartening? What's the response out there in the world to your work?
I mean, the heartening one is, like, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so that's often, in some ways, you see written responses. A lot of it is people on board. Like, I posted something just the other day, for example, on disability. So what you see is employment rates of Americans with a disability is absolutely rocketed after the pandemic, and particularly in occupations where it's much easier to work from home. And so from survey data and various, we have a lot of micro data on it, including people who get a disability, and you see that they tend to work less, but that reduction is much less than it was pre-pandemic. It's much easier to accommodate that. So, for example, you don't have to commute, and also it's much easier if you have, say, back pain, to have a special setup at home, or you have a colostomy bag or something. So that's been great, that kind of thing, where you point out all the benefits. There's a number of people I've spoken to, a couple of dozen people at least, with various disabilities, mostly physical, some mental, that say work from home for them has been amazing, because it makes it possible to work in a way they could never commute 5 days a week, go in and out. So that in general, people with kids, we see it. I've been talking a lot recently on gender. There's a lot of particularly women with younger kids. In fact, both men and women. So if you break it down, you see both men and women with young kids are particularly appreciative of it. Women in general have a slightly higher preference to work from home. It's not enormous, at least in the developed world. Interestingly, if you look at, have a student here, Hani Jalota, who's looking at India. And in India, there's a really big appreciation for involves harassment risk, and work involves harassment risk. There's a lot more sexism, social issues. So that's one group that's been really beneficial. One thing that's times is frustrating, although I have to say it's pretty rare, is I still get pushback from a few individuals. People complaining. There's one person in particular, industry complains, oh, look, work from home is destroying city centers. I kind of feel like, I don't really engage. The most extreme version is, it's like when the motor car came along, sure, the horse and cart business got put out, or when, antibiotics came along, the medieval people selling leeches got put out of business. I mean, whatever, there's always, new technology tends to displace older technology. But it's not a reason to stay in the Stone Age. Otherwise it would just never progress. And work from home is just a better technology. And yes, it's not even clear it's bad for city centers, because living out in near San Francisco in 2019, there was an enormous affordability crisis. The people used to picket Google buses. So they're picketing these techies being driven out of the city center. Some of the windows got broken in fights, and the police would, because there were people saying, get out of our city. It's too expensive to live here. The pandemic happened. A lot of these people did leave. Property prices went down. So
that relieves some pressure.
Yeah, it's really not obvious to me that having people move out of big city centres is a bad thing, because they are very expensive. I mean, you just have the same in New Zealand and Australia, London, where I'm from. Centre cities is unbelievably expensive. And if you were to think who should live actually in the centre of London, it will be people that need to go into work every day. If I'm working at Pret-a-Manger at McDonald's and I actually need to go into work every day, it should be me, not some techie or banker that actually only needs to go into work 2 days a week. So the techies and bankers go out to the suburbs. That should be good. And I know the property prices go down, but most of the people working at McDonald's and Pret-a-Manger are renting anyway. So their rent goes down. So yeah, there are a few people that lost, and they're kind of, but I would say of the folks I engage with, 90% plus are positive on work from home. There's kind of 5-10% are negative. So again, it comes to the win-win-win. You're involved in a change where so many people benefit and so few people lose, that you just don't tend to come across. As long as you don't go to parties of real estate investors, office block investors, you're fine.
Yeah, exactly. Pick your crowd, right?
Even they, I actually met the CEO of JLL the other day. Super smart, totally on board. I talked to him for over an hour. I agree with basically everything he said. So the people at the top end of these industries also get it. They completely understand it. And they have bigger fish to fry as well. I mean, sure, they're losing money because there's less commissions and transactions on office property, but they have a venture portfolio and they provide other services in it. They're down, but not massively. They're pretty diversified. The people that I think lost a lot is there's a group there, smaller, older, more old-fashioned kind of family businesses that all they do is own a bunch of offices, say in central New York.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there's what we're seeing over here, certainly in New Zealand, is there's the rise of the co-working space. So the office spaces that are flexible by design, and that you don't have your own corporate office necessarily, but you rent a space inside a co-working area. And actually that's kind of quite good, because you get to talk to people that you wouldn't normally talk to, and work with people who are in completely different sector, but it's all context and interesting, and keeps you connected as a city, which is kind of nice, which you don't normally get in those big office blocks in quite the same way. There's a couple of Stanford spin-offs and startups. I mean, they're beyond startups at this point that I'm involved in. That one of them called Tandem, that I think is only in the US. I don't know, at some point it will expand, but it gets companies to share space. It's kind of a cool idea. So they're New York, San Francisco, LA. But it works really well because company A has Monday, Tuesday, B has Wednesday, Thursday. But you can sometimes overlap and share kitchens. But often they work together. So obviously you don't have bitter rivals where they, just smashing each other's equipment when they're not looking. But
they're often, one might be in hardware, one might be in software, or one that you can imagine. So that's what one. There's another company, Gable, that is kind of like what's called an aggregator. So if you have office buildings and free spaces, you put it on, and other people go to the site and hire off. It's kind of like WeWork, but you
Yeah.
don't use only WeWork. You can use anyone, but they are definitely doing well. And
Yeah.
the reason is, people aren't going into the office every day, day in, day out. They're just wanting to buy a bit here and there.
Exactly. And I kind of see where you've said, if you need a space big enough to host everybody, but only perhaps for half the time, that surely lends itself to using those empty offices the other half of the time. Another business can do their half of the week when they come together, right? That there are ways and means of making this work so that we don't have, so much sort of wasted space in our city centres, but we're making better use of it. Yeah, it's interesting. It's part of the flow-on impact, isn't it, of all these different ways of working. So lastly, you've kind of touched on this already, but just to wrap up, my audience typically will be business leaders and heads of HR. They'd be kind of my core people who tune in. So what would you like to share with them as a wrap up?
This is highly profitable. It's worth tailoring it. So for a typical larger company, I mean, the main thing is to figure out who needs to come in every day. Most of it's pretty obvious, but who needs to come in every day? Who, if it's a professional worker, could be hybrid. And hybrid, because it has such large effects on reducing turnover, is profitable. I actually had a paper come out in Nature just recently showing that if you let people work from home 1 or 2 days a week, it doesn't seem to affect productivity either positively or negatively. You can think of arguments both ways, but in practice, about flat. But in the company we looked at, we did a big randomized control trial, reduces quit rates by 35%. So hybrid is generally actually quite profitable for professionals, office workers. And then there's going to be another group, typically about 5-10%, that may be best fully remote. And there I'm thinking call center, data entry, HR, payroll. Often these jobs are outsourced, but if they're not, the thought is, look, they may be 10% less efficient fully remote. That's not really the question about productivity. Execs tend to focus overly on productivity. I'm agreeing that's an important topic, but the key thing is profitability. Because if I tell you that your call centers are 10% less efficient, say your data entry, fully remote, but they cost 30% less because you can get rid of the office space and you can hire them in a low income, place, that's a good deal. And so I think for execs, I just think carefully through which roles really need to be in the office, particularly if you're based in like Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, Sydney, wherever, an expensive city.
Yeah.
Labor markets, I know the US better, but the variation in wage rates for the same activity varies by 30% across the US. So you can save huge amounts of money by shifting, if you're in New York or San Francisco, to a remote role and hiring someone in, say, Mississippi.
Yeah. On that remote work thing, I'm noticing here that we haven't seen huge numbers, but like you say, it's probably hovering around. Our latest data from Professor Jared Haar shows that we're about 6% of our workforce is fully remote. But that seems to be shrinking. Last time he did it, I think it was 8%. So it seems to be kind of narrowing, but it's kind of, like you said, it's kind of in that margin between that 5 and 10%. Is that what you're expecting? It will kind of stay there?
Remote work's a really interesting category. So in the US, we measure 12%, but it's, completely consistent with your 6 to 8. The sample populations will explain the difference. Where that will go is less clear. On the one hand, you think, well, it's going to go up. Technology is improving. It's easier to work remote, etc. On the other hand, some pretty heavy trends pushing against it. One of them is AI. So anything that can be done remotely is increasingly at risk of AI. Think of call centers. Within 5 years' time, it's not clear there'd be a lot of call center employment. What probably will happen is you ring up. AI would deal with all but the hardest stuff. And then you pass the really tough questions up to a human. But you only need 10% of humans, or data entry, etc. And the other thing is offshoring. So anything that's remote, if you're in an English language country, so for New Zealand, the Philippines time zone, it depends a bunch on time zones, but for us, we offshore a lot in the US down to Central South America, or India, the language skills can handle it. Or a lot of coding work, interestingly, for Silicon Valley startups is Brazil, Argentina. There's apparently a lot of good coders down there. Same time zone, they work pretty well with the teams here. So that's the other reason. So it's not that it disappears. It just disappears within New Zealand, within the US, but it's somewhere else around the world.
But globally, it's just shifted offshore somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah. So they may even be your employee. Depends how you employ the person. They may be a contractor, or they may actually be most people contract these people. So they don't want to deal with the headache of having employees in different locations.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the other things is I've noticed a lot of people get lonely. They actually want to have that human interaction, at least part of their working week. So it doesn't seem to be driven by the demand from
no, exactly.
point of view either. Yeah.
So I'll give you a date. Again, to finish on data. So when we surveyed tens of thousands of people. 20% of people want to come in every day. 50% want to be hybrid, and 30% want to be fully remote. So on your point, only 30% of people want to be fully remote. They tend to be people in their 30s, 40s with young kids that live far away for various reasons. It's hard to access labor markets. But yeah, the typical employee wants to come in about 2 to 3 days a week. That would be the average.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, amazing. Oh, look, thank you so much. I'm so grateful to you for taking the time and, sharing some of your insights and some of our conversation. So, yeah, I'll just leave it there. But is there anything you wanted to say to wrap up?
No, thanks, Gillian. Thanks very much for the interview.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Catch up.
All right. Thank you.